Well, we're going to talk about what you see on the screen here. And if you'd like to follow me in your Bible this morning, turn to 1 Kings chapter 18. For a couple of weeks, we're taking a look into the life of the prophet Elijah. The prophet Elijah. It's interesting in 1 Kings chapter 17, when Elijah walks into history. At this particular time in history, the northern kingdom of Israel is in a very dark place, both morally and spiritually. It's very dark. It's very bad. In fact, if you remember from last week, King Ahab and his wife by the name of Jezebel, they are on the throne and in power over Israel, and they have influenced the entire nation with what is called Baal worship. The worship of Baal, which is without question promoted, sponsored by the demonic world. Let me share what I read to you last week, just to give you an overview. In the time of Elijah, all Israel has gone after Baal. Idols of Baal were on almost every hill. These were idols which would represent the idea of fertility. It was the claim of the Baalites that their gods were responsible for all the blessings that came from heaven. Baal brought the rain. Baal brought the sun. Baal brought the fruitfulness of their crops. Baal was responsible for their prosperity. That was the message of this Baal thinking. And of course, Baalism was the temptation of this day and time. The message was, if you follow Baal and worship Baal, you can prosper. You'll get plenty of rain. Your crops are going to grow. You're going to have a great life. You will have the things that you don't have, and your bellies will be full if you follow Baal. By the way, this whole Baal mythology was actually the creation of the Canaanite nations that were around the nation of Israel. And so the pressure was on Israel, coming at them from every side with this message. And then when King Ahab marries Jezebel, Jezebel, her very name is a commemoration of the idea of Baal. But when Ahab and her hook up, man, that's when the floodgates of idolatry and evil just take off in the nation. And then the people of the northern kingdom of Israel begin to openly support the thinking and the notions of this Baalism. I mean, try to imagine what's going on. The whole country now was chasing after Baal, which was a demonically sponsored religion full of evil on every hand. I mean, it was extremely dark. But on the other hand, in order to understand all of this correctly, you should know that the people of Israel have not totally abandoned the God of their fathers, Yahweh, Jehovah, for this idea of Baalism. The problem is really what we call syncretism, which is a blending together of the worship of Jehovah with the worship of Baal. Just like today, there are people who are trying to take the Christian message and blend it together with some political philosophy. Or people are trying to take the message of Christianity and blend it together with a lot of New Age thinking and Hinduism. This is taking place big time in our in our country. It's called syncretism. There is a commentator by the name of Dennis Bratcher. He writes about this syncretism and how it is to be understood. He writes, Yahweh or Jehovah was seen as the God of power, the God who fought Pharaoh, who parted the Reed Sea, who led the Israelites through the desert, who parted the Jordan, who brought them into the land by toppling the walls of Jericho and routing the Canaanite and Philistine armies. This led to the idea that Yahweh, the God of the patriarchs, was a powerful warrior God, the God of the desert, who could be counted on to march in with his heavenly armies in times of crisis. However, as the Israelites settled into the land, they encountered the fertility cult of Baal. As a result, in time, they were convinced that while Yahweh may be God of the desert and the God of battles and God of power, it was Baal who was in charge of the more mundane aspects of everyday life, such as rain and crops and livestock. In this thinking, the Israelites never abandoned the worship of Yahweh. They simply added the worship of Baal to the mix. That's syncretism. They had one God for a crisis and another God for everyday life. The actual worship of Baal was carried out in terms of imitative magic, whereby sexual acts by both male and female temple prostitutes were understood to awaken and arouse Baal, who then brought rain to make Mother Earth fertile. This means when crops were abundant, Baal was praised and thanked for his abundant rain. It's in this context that the experience of drought had such an impact. Not only was a lack of rain a threat to survival, it was also a sign that the gods of the Baal myth were unhappy. It's also in this context that the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal carries such significance. The issue is, who's in control? Who controls the rain? Is it Baal or is it Yahweh? God. Now that last statement there that I have in red, it takes us back to last week in chapter 17, verse 1. If you remember, this is the entrance of Elijah the prophet. He just steps right on the scene. He's kind of like the Clint Eastwood of the Old Testament. He comes in on, wearing that hat and the little cigar and the little thing, and he's just really cool. I don't think he was a smoker, but, let me make your day. I mean, that's the kind of character that he is. And he walks right into the presence of Elijah, or Ahab. Look at this. Now, Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." And so he lays down this bold declaration that God has put on his heart. Now, as we saw last week, this whole drought, this famine, is from God, and it's designed really to accomplish two things. Number one, this was designed to get the attention of a rebellious people. God had previously foretold that if you rebel and get away from me, the first thing I'm going to do to get your attention is turn off the spigot. There will be no rain. There will be no dew. This is designed to get the attention of these rebellious people on the basis of what God had previously said. But then also, this was designed to set up a drama, really, between God and Baal. It was said that Baal is the one who controls the rain. And so God is now challenging that. Baal controls the rain and the weather? Let's see. And so the confrontation is on. This drought will continue for a period of 3 years. And it's during this time that God puts Elijah into hiding. He's kind of in protective custody because everyone is looking for him. I mean, he's the guy who has been responsible for this famine, at least in their thinking. So they're looking for him. But then in chapter 18, the great drama of dramas is going to take place. Look at this verse. Chapter 18, verse 17. This is the first meeting that Elijah and Ahab have face to face since the time Elijah made this bold declaration. Verse 17. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is this you, troubler, you troubler of Israel?" Now, you got to know there's a lot of emotion in that statement, more than I'm conveying. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of rage, and a lot of blame. Is this you? But then in the next verse, Elijah kicks back. Look what he says. Verse 18. He said, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and you have followed the Baals." And so Elijah puts his finger on the real problem. The problem really that Ahab doesn't want to face up to. And so what does Ahab do? He pushes the blame elsewhere. It's not us, it's you. He is engaging in classic blame shifting. And I tell you, that sounds very familiar to me because I have long felt, folks, the one thing above everything that keeps Christians from growing, I mean really growing, that will grieve the work of the Holy Spirit, is this idea of using defense mechanisms in order to deflect the truth so that you don't have to deal with it. Look at this text. This is in Proverbs 28:13. He who covers his sins will not prosper. How do you cover your sin? You pass the buck of responsibility. You shift blame. You utilize defense mechanisms so that when somebody says something to you about who you are and what you're doing, you use some kind of excuse so that you don't have to deal with it. And I'll tell you something, Christians do this, unfortunately, so very, very well. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they haven't been around. They just kind of been wandering about in their own life in the world. And I kind of confronted them about that. "We miss you. Where have you been?" And they said, "Oh, no, don't worry about me. Everything's okay. I'm not really where I need to be, but it's not that bad. At least I'm not like," and they named someone else. That's what I'm talking about. Failure to accept personal responsibility and accountability before God. It's so easy, like Adam in the garden, to pass the buck of responsibility. Now, in the next verse, Elijah puts forth his challenge to hopefully end this Baal problem once and for all. Look at this. "Now then," this is Elijah speaking, "now then send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Now, Asherah is the girlfriend of Baal. This is his consort. And there are 850 total prophets that are all dedicated to this idea of Baalism. Verse 20. So Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Now, one of the things I want you to notice as we go through this, and in particular in this showdown, please notice how Elijah is going out of his way to give to the prophets of Baal every single advantage. For example, Mount Carmel was at this time in history dedicated to the god Baal, this false god. The Phoenician people said this is the dwelling place of Baal. In other words, Mount Carmel was thought to be the center of his operations. And so Elijah says, okay, let's go to Mount Carmel. I want you to have every advantage. Let's go, and we're going to have a showdown. Now try to picture it in your mind. Here is all of the prophets of Baal and Asherah, 850. They're dressed in these very prestigious purple and white robes. They have pointy hats carrying their staff. And they're looking so prominent in the eyes of everyone who is there. And then over against them, here is Elijah. 2 Kings 1:8 says that Elijah is a guy who wears a leather middle piece here to cover up his important parts, and he is covered with hair. He has that mohair sweater that never goes away, if you know what I'm talking about. That's just the nature of this guy. He's a very rough-looking hombre, you might say. But that's Elijah. Now here he is, alone up against these 850 prophets of Baal. Now watch how it unfolds, starting in verse 21. Then verse 21. There it is. Elijah came near to all the people and said, by the way, commentators point out that there is likely a few 100,000 people who are now gathered there at Mount Carmel. So Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. By the way, the word hesitate, some people translate it halt. How long will you halt? Or how long will you limp between two opinions? Actually, the Hebrew word means something like this. Imagine standing around on one foot and then on another foot and then on another foot. That's the picture behind the word. They're just kind of dancing about between two opinions. We would say they're on the fence constantly. And so the prophet says, how long are you going to be in this place? Notice, but the people did not answer him a word. I'm not sure why they didn't say anything. I'm guessing they were probably under real conviction of God. Verse 22. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Verse 23, now let them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox for themselves, and cut it up, place it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. Again, he gives to them the advantage. They have home court advantage. He's letting them have other advantages. You make the choice. You choose first. You do this, and then I'll do my thing. Then you will call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire. Now, it was thought, I pointed this out last week. It was thought that Baal not only controls the rains, but he also controls the sky, the sun. There are pictures of Baal archaeologists have found that are inscribed in certain ways. And Baal is on a cloud in the air, and he has a lightning bolt in his hands to convey that he controls the heavens. He controls the fire, the lightning. And so Elijah's challenge is the God who answers by fire. He is God. And all the people said, that is a good idea. So there's agreement. Verse 25. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one ox for yourself and prepare it first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it. Again, you go first. Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, and so we're talking about hours of time that pass by, and they call out, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they leaped upon the altar which they had made. You can see what's going on here. They're starting to panic. They're kind of working themselves into a frenzy. There is no voice and no one answered. And so they start leaping about. And then look at this. It came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, call out with a loud voice, for he is a God. Either he is occupied or gone aside. The phrase gone aside, other translations convey the idea of Elijah saying he's maybe in the men's room. He's out there doing his business. Call with a loud voice. Either he is occupied or going to the restroom, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and he needs to be awakened. He's having some fun at this point, isn't he? Just kind of kicking it back and really having a bit of fun. So they cried with a loud voice and cut themselves. I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail down the road, but there is a phenomena that is taking place among young people today that is called cutting. And young people are actually cutting open their body. It's a very dangerous thing, but it's happening, and it's something that I know has happened among some young folks that I am acquainted with. We'll get into that another time and talk about where it comes from. But it says in verse 28, so they cried with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until blood gushed out on them. I mean, this is turning into a bloody scene. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. That's either around 3 p.m. or later. But there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. This statement right here caused me to think about Psalm 115. Verse 2 says, why let the nations say, where is their God? Our God is in the heavens, and he does as he wishes. He's sovereign. Their idols are merely things of silver and gold shaped by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, and eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, and noses that cannot smell. They have hands that cannot feel, feet that cannot walk, and throats that cannot make a sound. And those who make idols are just like them, as are all who trust in them. The point here is that you become really like the God that you serve and worship. If you worship these false idols of whatever stature, you end up being like them. You can't see, you can't hear. Life gets distorted as this is so very distorted. You become ultimately like the God you serve. And it's kind of interesting if you look at the world and look at the gods of certain nations. Look at the fruit of their particular god and see what follows in the wake of the belief of that god. For example, in Hinduism, which is prominent in India, there are people who are starving by the thousands and thousands. They can't eat because their belief prevents them from eating meat. In the myth of reincarnation, they won't eat an animal for fear it might be one of their distant relatives coming back. I mean, this is confusion. And you see this kind of thing wherever there are false gods that people worship. This confusion, you're ultimately left high and dry. And that's exactly the case here. Look at verse 30. Elijah at this point has had enough. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. I like that. There's something in that statement that speaks to us, because it could be that some of us need to repair the altar of the Lord in our life. The altar that isn't what it used to be. It's broken down and it needs repairing on our part. Look at verse 31. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. There it is, verse 33. And he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 pitchers with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. The water flowed around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. Now, I know what you're thinking. They're in a famine. Where did they get the water? Well, if you check any map of the Middle East, you will see that geographically, Mount Carmel is very, very close to the Mediterranean Sea. It would be nothing for them to take buckets and carry water to Mount Carmel. That would be a very short distance. And that's what they're doing. Notice he's drenching all of this. He's doing everything he can to give them the advantage, because he wants to prove that God alone is Lord of life. Look at verse 36. At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, "O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word." His prayer is for 3 things, as you can see. And then he restates, "Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back again." Verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. Maybe it looked like this. And I'm just imagining the sound. And everything disappears. The sacrifice, the water, the stones, it's all just disintegrated by the fire of the Lord that fell. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Then Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. That is, he killed them. He had them killed, every one of them. Now that sounds harsh to us, but you have to understand the context of Baalism. What I've shared with you about Baalism is easy to hear. If you were to Google that and do a little research on your own, you will be blown away by the evil of Baalism, the child sacrifice, all of the other things that are taking place in this evil, false religion. So there's a malignancy in Israel, and Elijah says, we've got to deal with that malignancy. Cut off the leg to save the patient. And essentially that's what's happening here. Now, before we can wrap this up for today, the main question, I would argue, is what is God saying in this story to you and to me? What is God saying to us here this morning? And I believe the answer is here in verse 21. Here's what God is saying. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, and I added the words, or whatever, follow him. How long will you halt? How long will you go back and forth between these two opinions? Now, the reason this challenge is important for us to hear today is because of what Jesus said in Matthew 6. He said in verse 24, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon or money." You cannot serve, you cannot worship money. Now, I should point out, this doesn't mean that people take out money and worship it somehow, like you would worship dollar bills. What they worship is not money, but what money can do, what money can accomplish, what money can achieve, the power that you can buy, etc. That's called mammon. That's mammon. That's the idea behind the word mammon. It's not loving just dollars and cents. It's loving what money can do to give you any advantage in life that would be outside of the will of God. So no one can serve two masters. However, this isn't the only application. In fact, this statement can be true in any area of life. No one can serve two masters, and that's because loyalty to one or the other is always eventually going to be challenged. You're going to come to a head sooner or later, and loyalty is going to be challenged. That's just the way it is. Now, if you look around at the church in America today, it's my view that this is always, it seems, the main issue. The main issue that is always present in the church. And that is, who really has your loyalty? Who really has your attention? Who really has your heart, your affections? Is it God or is it Baal? Is it God or is it mammon? Is it God or is it, and you just fill in the blanks? The answer to that question most of the time is both. It's both. That's our problem. It's not that God is abandoned, but we have the problem today of hearts that are divided. It's what James refers to as the problem of being double-minded. And what does the Bible say? A double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. So God says, I can't have that in my people. I need you to be fully committed to me. When I was kind of writing out notes on Friday, I remembered a song that I had heard about 35 years ago, and it went something like this. John Fisher wrote it. I'm not sure you've even heard of John Fisher, but he wrote a lot of music, and he said this. This is one of the verses. So you want to be forgiven without taking the blame. You want to eat forbidden fruit without leaving a stain. You want the glory, but you don't want the shame. Everyone wants to get to heaven, Lord. Nobody wants to die. Everyone wants to get to heaven, Lord. Nobody wants to die. Then this verse. You want to be a winner without taking a loss. You want to be a disciple without counting the cost. You want to follow Jesus, but you don't want to go to the cross. Everyone wants to get to heaven, Lord. Nobody wants to die. I read this week the words of a college president. He was asked this question: what has changed the most in the past 20 years with young people who are entering college? And his answer was this: young adults today are far less willing to commit to anything. Now, I get that, and I see that, but frankly, I don't think it's only with young people. I think it's probably true with and in almost any age group around. This issue of commitment, this issue of devotion, it's something that people everywhere are backing up from. And so perhaps the real question for us to consider this morning is this: what keeps us from making the kind of commitment that God is wanting from us? And to that end, let me share just a couple of thoughts, and I'll do this quickly. Number one is this. This is to explain the loss in commitment. Sometimes people seem to think that if you have good intentions, then that's good enough. Well, I meant to do the right thing. I just didn't get around to it. I meant to do this. And Jesus would say in John 13:17, if you know these things, happy are you if you do them. Happy are you, blessed are you. Notice, it's one thing to know the truth. It's another thing to apply that truth to one's life. It's not enough just to know. The blessing is in the doing, the practicing of. Secondly, another reason we might waver from commitment is because of a learned procrastination habit. Learned, it's a habit. Being late is a habit. Oh, there's something I want to say here, but I won't. So we think, I'll do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'll get to it, mañana, tomorrow I'll get around to doing it. I can't begin to tell you how many people I talk to, and they will say to me, they've been MIA for a while, and I'll talk with them. They'll say, man, I believe God, you know that. And I think I'm a Christian, but look, I just have so much going on. There's no way I can get out to church. We're just so busy. We've got soccer, and we've got this and this. And we're just so busy. But someday I'll get back in the groove, and it's going to work out okay. And let me tell you something. That kind of thinking is built on such a fallacy. And the fallacy is that we all have plenty of time. And maybe we do, but maybe we don't. James 4, verse 14 and 13. James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit." That's what we're going to do. And James says, "Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor who appears for a little while and then vanishes away." Augustine wrote this: "God has promised forgiveness to our repentance, but he has not promised tomorrow to our procrastination." Folks, I'll tell you something. Take it from me. The older you get, life accelerates. I yearn for those long days that I used to say, "Man, has this been a long day?" I haven't had one of those in 30 years. I would love to have a long day, but those days, time accelerates the older you get. I don't understand it, but I know it's true. And we have to take advantage of opportunities that God gives us now, today, without procrastination, without putting things off. That leads me to a third thought, and it's this. Sometimes we hesitate in making a clear commitment because we're in denial. Someone will say, "Oh, come on, everything's fine, everything's going okay. Don't worry about me, I'll take care of it, it's going to be fine." I've seen this in people in the extreme who have an addiction problem. And the hardest thing to do is to get an addict to admit that he is an addict or that she is an addict. I read this the other day. Addicts are people who tend to minimize that they have a problem of using. They claim the ability to stop at any time. It's not that big a deal. I'm not hurting anyone. Everyone has their faults. No one is perfect. What right do you have to judge me? It's all about denial. Denial keeps people from dealing with what everyone around them can easily see. Another reason for failure to commit might be this. Some people seem to believe that we must go along in order to get along. You've probably heard of that. Maybe you told your kids as they explained a problem in school, and you perhaps said to them, "Well, just go along to get along." You have a teacher that is kind of giving them a rough time, maybe, about their Christian faith. And so how do you deal with it? Well, you just have to go along to get along. Try to imagine this scene in 1 Kings chapter 18. There are 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah. They're walking around on Mount Carmel with their very bold purple and white robes of distinction. They have on their pointy hats of distinction. And against them, you have one old, weird-looking guy by the name of Elijah, hairy Elijah. I can hear someone saying or reasoning, "Oh, come on, how could 850 people be wrong? They must be right. How could they all be wrong? How could that be?" The prophets even had the power of the state on their side. Ahab and Jezebel were dedicated to Baal, and they had cut off the worship of the true God in many ways and made it illegal to even have an altar built to Jehovah. And so you might think in that circumstance, what's the easiest way to get along? Just go with the flow, man. Go with the flow. A lot of people do this, don't they? Without standing up for what is right, for what is truth. Just go with the flow. My last point is this. To explain indecision, Very often people like us are trained by the culture to think that we can have it all in this life. That we can have all the goodies of the world, and we can also have all of God that we need and want. And that's a myth, because the Bible says repeatedly, over and over again, you cannot be neutral with God. Jesus said, you are either for me or you are against me. You are for me or you are against me. Indecision is no decision. Indecision is simply a decision against. Look at this text. Revelation chapter 3, verse 15. Jesus speaks to the church of Laodicea, the last days church portrayed. And Jesus says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spit you out of my mouth. He then says, for you say, and notice the distorted self-image that he is zeroing in on. For you say, I am rich, I have everything I want, I don't need a thing. And you don't realize that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. It's possible to think one thing, but in reality, something else is true. I close with this word by C.S. Lewis. He says, God will invade, but I wonder whether people who ask God to interfere openly and directly in our world quite realize what it will be like when he does. When that happens, it is the end of the world. When the author walks onto the stage, the play is over. God is going to invade, all right, but what is the good of saying you are on his side then? When you see the whole natural universe melting away like a dream and something else, something it never entered your head to conceive comes crashing in. Something so beautiful to some of us and so terrible to others that none of us will have any choice left. For this time, it will be God without disguise, something so overwhelming that it will strike either irresistible love or irresistible horror into every creature. It will be too late then to choose your side. There is no use saying you choose to lie down when it has become impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time when we discover which side we really have chosen, whether we realized it before or not. Now, today, this moment is our chance to choose the right side. God is holding back to give us that chance. It will not last forever. We must take it or leave it. My prayer is that we will take it. How long will you halt? How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If God is God, if Christianity is true, then go for it. If it isn't true, my advice to you is jump into the world with both feet and sin away until you can't stand it anymore. But if God is the Lord, then give yourself to him totally. Surrender to him, because he means everything to you and to me. How long will we halt, we hesitate between two opinions? Let's stand together.